halls all across the country. A sociologist by training, she delves into labor history to better understand the issues and barriers confronting today's workers. In She Was One of Us, Eleanor Roosevelt and the American Worker, O'Farrell tells the story of how Eleanor Roosevelt, deep and enduring commitment to the labor movement, developed and how she translated that commitment into action. In her 1996 book, Rocking the Boat, Union Women's Voices, 1915 to 1975, with Joyce Cornblue, O'Farrell first heard the stories told by Union women about meeting with the First Lady at the White House, visiting her at Valkill, and joining her on the campaign trail or at Union meetings. When labor history books and Roosevelt biographies provided little insight into Roosevelt's work with unions, she began her own research. Brigid is a lecturer at Mills College and affiliated with the Eleanor Roosevelt Papers Project, George Washington University. Previous associations include Stanford University's Institute for Research on Women and Gender, the Women's Research and Education Institute, Washington, D.C., the National Research Council, National Academy of Sciences, and the Wellesley College Center for Research on Women. Brigid is also president of the Coastside Democrats, serves on the San Mateo County Democratic Central Committee, and is a member of the National Writers Union Local 1981. She lives in Moss Beach with her husband, T.J. Gauthier. They have 4 sons, and she is very proud to have given talks on Eleanor Roosevelt in all 3 of her grandsons' elementary schools. So let's welcome Brigid O'Farrell.
Bravo.
Thank you, Barbara, for that very nice introduction. I have to say that the first, 3rd, and 6th grades were really the toughest audiences I have approached, but it was great fun. I'm just really pleased to be here. There is no better place to talk about Eleanor Roosevelt than at a local Democratic club meeting. Eleanor Roosevelt was the ultimate precinct captain. She was deeply, deeply believed in grassroots politics and engaging citizens at a very local level in their homes, in their backyards. And so this is a kind of meeting that she went to all across New York State and all across the country. When she was invited, she would come to speak. She was at the same time also a power behind the Democratic Party at a national level, but she never ever forgot her local Democratic roots, and she would often return to them in New York State. She and Franklin both kept very close track of what happened in New York. But she also was and believed wholeheartedly in democracy with a small d. She insisted that everyone had to gather facts, listen to all sides, make an informed decision about candidates and about issues, and then act to follow up on those decisions. And those are things that all of you here in this room do every day. And it's the kind of, it was really for her the lifeblood of democracy. And it's just particularly fun for this talk to have the activists, to have people who have been here and engaged for a very long time, to have new people, to have a candidate. This is what democracy was all about for Eleanor Roosevelt. As Barbara mentioned, this book did grow out of a previous book I had done with these union women who in their 80s and 90s were beginning to pass away, and their stories were nowhere in the history books. And so this oral history project back in the 70s collected their stories. And I had the privilege of doing 3 of these interviews in Massachusetts. They're just these incredibly strong, wonderful women who worked in factories, worked in the textile mills, telephone operators. And but I was so struck that these women had these stories about Eleanor Roosevelt, going to the White House, going to Hyde Park, campaigning with her. And there just wasn't any information when you went to the history books or to the voluminous writings on the Roosevelts. Blanche Cook, Eleanor's most recent biographer, does talk about Eleanor's work with women and with workers. You have to read 800 pages of Blanche Cook to get 8 pages of Eleanor in the labor movement. So when we moved to California from Washington, D.C., This became my California project, to look into what was going on. Was Eleanor really involved with the labor movement? Having no idea at that point whether or not there would be enough for a book. And I was just amazed at what I found and what wasn't in the history books. As a sociologist, I'm not a trained historian. I have developed a huge appreciation for historians and how difficult it is to write about the progressive era through John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign. I've also learned that the history we read is the history the historian wanted to tell us. And so now, to some extent, I've been guilty of the same things that they have done in the past. There's a whole lot of things that got dropped out of this book because I just began to focus on Eleanor and the American worker. And that's the story that I want to tell, and it's really being told for the first time because it has been left out of other history books. And the question becomes, how did a woman born to such wealth and a life of privilege and power become so committed to workers and to their unions? And how did she translate that commitment into action? And you really can't write or talk about Eleanor Roosevelt without making that link to action, because that was crucial for her. And today I want to trace a little bit for you her commitment to unions, how it developed and how it changed over time, how the unions became politically connected to the Roosevelts. And I wanted to pull out some of the more political stories for this audience, because politics is what you do. And the politics are very intertwined with the labor unions. And we'll see some interesting developments for how the unions became engaged in national politics. And then how Eleanor Roosevelt took her commitment to workers and unions and the political process to the United Nations with her, where she worked with the labor movement to develop workers' rights as human rights and to have workers included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And finally, I want to talk just a little bit about and highlight how her voice can be heard today from California to Wisconsin to Maine. And one of the things that I've been trying to do since the book came out is to write articles, op-eds, to speak about what can we learn from the kind of work that Eleanor Roosevelt did, and does it resonate today? And I think that it very much does, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. So let me begin on a cold day in late December in 1936, just 1 year after the National Labor Relations Act was signed into law by President Roosevelt. This was the New Deal legislation that guaranteed employees a voice at work. And it's the foundation of our labor relations system today. Although it's been amended and weakened, it is still the core document that we work from. On that day, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt celebrated the first anniversary of her syndicated My Day column. And she celebrated by joining the American Newspaper Guild, CIO. She told her January 5th press conference that while she couldn't go on strike and she couldn't walk a picket line, although she always refused to cross a picket line as First Lady and after she left the White House, she believed in what the Guild was trying to do. Her membership was widely noted in the newspapers across the country, and many of the women reporters who were present at the conference belonged to the same union, and it was a union just formed 2 or 3 years earlier.